if you would like to. Hello to all of you at home. Thanks for tuning in. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Rabbi Foonberg. I am the director of our religious school here at Congregation B'nai Israel. I love doing these afternoon talks. Once upon a time at my other shul, that used to be my regular gig. I would always give the afternoon talk. So I went to Rabbi and Cantor and said, hey, what's up for the afternoon? And they said, I don't know, do you have any ideas? I said, yeah, I want to talk. I want to teach, because I love doing text study, especially during this time. When we're all like in this mode of prayer and talking about the themes of the high holidays, about forgiveness, about reconciliation, my question is always, what does the Bible teach us about this? What do the stories of our matriarchs and our patriarchs teach us? Do they teach us about forgiveness and reconciliation? And I'm going to suggest, and we're going to go through a couple of stories that some of them do and some of them don't. But what is the one thing we know for sure about our matriarchs and patriarchs? They're human beings, exactly right. They were very, very human, and they made a lot of mistakes, and we learn from their mistakes. And we learn a lot from their mistakes, and I think it's really important to study those and take them into our heart. Because isn't it also true that we learn from our own mistakes, right? A mistake is just another opportunity to try again. Yes, we sin, we make mistakes, and sometimes we're not forgiven, and that hurts, and that's painful, but we keep going, we keep trying, we never lose hope that we can reconnect and reconcile. So this was originally a 3-hour presentation, so I'm not going to get to all of it. We're going to, in 1 hour, we'll see how far we go. I'd like to do Cain and Abel, and Abraham and Isaac, and Jacob and Esau today, if we can get to them. So if you want to use the book, you can. You don't have to, but I'll give you the chapter and verse, and I'll also read the text out loud. We're going to start with Cain and Abel, but let's first say our blessing for studying Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed is God who commands us to immerse in the study of Torah. So Cain and Abel. We all know this story. Cain and Abel are brothers, and they go to make an offering to God. And the text says something to the effect of Cain and Abel is chapter 4. Genesis chapter 4. I don't have the page number. Someone else will find it. Around 25. Yes, 25. So Cain brings an offering, but it says that Abel brings the best of his flock. Cain brings a wheat offering or something, and Abel brings the best of his flock. The implication being that Cain's offering was okay. He didn't go to any great lengths or efforts, right? And so how does God respond? Those of you who know the story. How does God respond? He says it again? Abel, right? He heeds Abel's offering and kind of brushes Cain off, right? And of course, it says his face falls, right? He's distressed now that God isn't accepting his offering. Now, we can read back into this a little apologetically for Cain because, there have been no real rules about how to give offerings at this point, right? Those rules don't come until way later in the text and way later in our people's history. So how does Abel know what is appropriate to bring to God? I don't know. Maybe he just understands the reverence he should have for the Creator, and Cain didn't. And that might have been enough, right? With those rules or not with those rules. So Cain is distressed, and he goes out to his brother Abel. This is chapter 4, verse 8. And it says, Cain said to his brother Abel, but it doesn't actually say what he says. And then it says, and when they were in the field, Cain set upon his brother Abel and killed him. There's no words between the two. We have no understanding if Abel knew what was coming, or if Abel had any idea at all what was going through his brother's head. So what are some of the things we know already about the story? Or what are some of the things that we know the rabbis teach about this story? What are some things you already know? Right? So God knows that Cain kills his brother. God comes looking for him. And he says, the ground, I can see your brother's blood in the ground. And Cain says, am I my brother's keeper? Okay, that's one issue that comes up. What else? Anything else that you remember that you know? So here we have, I'm going to take it to another level. I'm going to talk about the relationship with the siblings. In the Torah, sibling relations are a big issue, right? Cain and Abel, the first siblings, one of them kills the other right away, right? We're going to read later about Jacob and Esau, two siblings who are twins. And they always talk about that special twin relationship, but do they have a special twin relationship? No. Then you get the whole story, then you get Rachel and Leah, a story of jealousy and trouble between those two women. And then, of course, you get to Joseph and all of his brothers and the strife that happens there. It's a very interesting thing, I think, just on a big picture, as to why the Torah spends so much time on sibling relationships, even more so than married relations, I think. Right, we're going to get back to that. Right. Well, so that's one of my questions. Who are the parents here? What is the parents' responsibility in regards to a sibling relationship? I have a sibling. Right? And does that always work? Right? You know the saying, you can pick your friends, but you can't pick your family. And not all siblings get along. I'll be honest with you. My brother and I have not had the best relationship. We're very different people. Very different. We were raised in the same house with the same two loving parents whom we both each have our own wonderful relationships with. Now we're older, we're getting along fine, don't worry. But there was some years where we didn't get along. We didn't talk. We just had nothing really to talk about. It happens sometimes in families. Some people are really lucky that they and their siblings, I know, Joshua, oh my gosh. There are 3 siblings who, I've never seen such love between siblings. It's beautiful, it's fabulous, right? Same parents, right? I had the same parent. It's not always about the parents. Right. Right, okay. And that's a possibility, right? So isn't it interesting, if that's the case for Cain and Abel, isn't it interesting if Abel was the favored one, because he's the younger, right? You often think of the firstborn sometimes as being the favored one, but not in this case. And actually not in many cases in the Bible, right? We always hear about the younger taking over from the older. So maybe the parents were playing favoritism of some sort, and maybe that impacted Cain and Abel. Are they responsible? Are the parents responsible for what happened? Who's responsible? Cain, right? Cain is definitely responsible. It's his actions. He's the one who took the actions. Right. Do you think Abel went around going, ha ha, God took my sacrifice and not yours, ha ha? It's possible. He could have been one of those spoiled younger children, right? So what we learn from this first story of these first siblings is that there are a lot of things that impact them, right? Their parents impact them. Maybe it was up to Adam and Eve to teach them what the role of God was. Maybe if Adam and Eve had taught them a little bit better about that reverence for God that we talked about, maybe Cain would have gotten that. Maybe they failed to give that kind of spiritual guidance to the boys. It's hard to say. One of the things that we know for sure, and one of the things that I take from this particular verse, verse 8, it says, Cain said to his brother Abel, and then it doesn't tell us, right? I read into that there was a serious communication problem. For some reason, these boys are not communicating. He may have thought he said something, but he didn't, or he may have thought he said something and Abel was unable to hear it, right? Because when we are trying to communicate with another person, I may think that I'm explaining myself well, but if the other person doesn't hear it the way I think, then there's no communication, right? Here's a situation where I think these two brothers did not have a way of communicating, and that led to the relationship falling apart, literally.
They wouldn't have spent a lot of time together, probably.
So it's possible. I mean, this is where the rabbis would come in and read into the text. Well, maybe, he was out in the fields and he was with the flock, but you would assume they would have eaten meals together, they would have been with their parents, but we don't know, right? Because so much of the Bible doesn't say. At this point, it doesn't say, but Cain is sent off by himself at this point, right? And it never says anything about the two of them having kids or anything. All right, so that's our first sibling issue, and needless to say, there's no forgiveness and there's no reconciliation, right? What do you think? Right? Right? So it could be a material value or it could just be a spiritual value too. I wouldn't want to differentiate that, but it's possible because we also look at God as a parent, right? So here's another parent, like Helene suggested before, playing favorites. Could be. It could be. God punishes him pretty harshly. He sends him out. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, Cain's pretty much doomed after this. Right. Yeah, this family has been destroyed over this action, and yeah, you could blame God for it. Or as I would like us to do instead, in light of our teachings, is take responsibility for it ourselves. I think Cain had to take responsibility for his actions. Maybe the parents needed to take some responsibility. We can't blame God for everything. All right, now let's look at Genesis chapter 22. And this is not a sibling issue. This is a father and son issue, right? This is the binding of Isaac, Abraham and Isaac. I'm not going to read the whole story. God calls upon Abraham, tells him to take his son, his favored one, Isaac, up the mountain to be offered as a sacrifice. Abraham takes Isaac up the mountain and is about ready, right? I'm giving you the abridged version. Has his arm up, is about ready to slaughter his son, and he's stopped by an angel, right? And now I'm going to read from verse 15, Genesis 22:15, which is on page 121, for those of you who are reading. Cain. The angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time from heaven and said, "By myself I swear, the Lord declares, because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your favored one, I will bestow my blessings upon you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars of heaven and the sands on the seashore. And your descendants shall seize the gates of their foes. All the nations of the earth shall bless themselves by your descendants, because you, Abraham, have obeyed my, God's, command." Abraham then returned to his servants, and they departed together for Beersheba, and Abraham stayed in Beersheba. So what is the common understanding of what happens with Abraham and Isaac at this point? What have you learned? They go separate ways, right? They never speak again, we're told. It doesn't actually say that anywhere, right? So I would like to suggest, and who do we blame for this story? I mean, who's the villain here? Who's the bad guy? God on one hand, right? We say, why, how, God, could you do such a thing by asking Abraham to do that? Yes, there's definitely a theological issue. Abraham. Why didn't Abraham say, hey, God, wait a minute, like he did when he was championing for Sodom and Gomorrah? If there's 50 innocent people, why kill everybody? And so here we wonder, why did Abraham not fight back for his son like he did before? So yeah, we really question parenting here, right? All of us who are parents are going, oh my God, I could never, ever, ever, right? I'd go against God. So I want to turn this story around a little bit and suggest that, Isaac doesn't really necessarily know, and we do get a hint of that because Isaac says, we're going up the mountain, Dad, and I don't see a sheep. What's going on? And Abraham says, don't worry, Yeah, that's really fuzzy. I've heard that he's 13 in some sources. Some say he's a young adult. I don't know. Either way, he's a young man. And in those days, 13 or 20, they're considered young men, right? He's not a kid necessarily. But he goes up, he does what his father says. Why? He's an obedient, dutiful son, revering his father, honoring his father, right? They go up, the ram comes, he doesn't kill himself. What do you think is Isaac's? This is a little bibliodrama we could do, but I'm not going to make you do that. But what do you think Isaac is thinking at that point? When the killing has stopped and God says, you have done this, so now I'm going to bless you. What is Isaac saying? Well, first of all, maybe he's going, phew, dodged a bullet, right? Or the knife, all right? Thank God, literally. Thank God God stopped this horrible thing from happening. And say again, Helene? Yeah, Dad, hey. Thank God we didn't have to go through with this, but, was that really your plan? Was that, So therefore Isaac would have felt, Josh.
Yeah. Like it's one of those moments where
#awkward.
Yeah, I guess so. Very much like something really intense that you probably wouldn't understand because you're still pretty young. Whether you're 35 or 13, that's a pretty young age. Death is still a pretty new concept.
Okay.
And so that kind of like awkward time of like I almost just died, but then also I almost just died by the hand of my father. And then now there's a blessing coming in after that. Like it's very, these two events really seem to correlate in a weird, odd way and almost don't correlate.
Yeah.
Because they're so far from each other. Like
Absolutely.
Life and prosperity and then also death before it.
Yeah. Okay, oh my God, I'm about to die. And oh my God, there's the ram, and now we're getting blessings. Okay? Definitely polar opposite emotions, definitely a roller coaster, which matches our roller coaster of emotions on Yom Kippur. So Isaac has a choice here. What is he going to do? It's Yom Kippur. He's being told, you got to forgive. Is he going to forgive his father? We already know from Mimi that they may never have talked again. Maybe they did talk, though. If you were a son, I know you, Josh, would do this, you'd say, hey, Dad, we need to have a sit down, right? We need to have a talk about what just happened here. I need an explanation. I sense that there was something powerful going on, and I know, Dad, how much you believe, and maybe this was a lesson for me about how much I'm supposed to believe, right? We always say the best way to parent is to model behavior. Well, this was a model of extreme piety. I would like to suggest that these two had a relationship. The text may not tell us that they had a relationship or they had any conversation, but one thing we know for sure, and we read later in chapter 24, Abraham arranges for Isaac to get a wife. If they had truly gone their own separate ways, like we've all often been taught, then how would Abraham even know? Maybe Isaac would have gone somewhere else and gotten his own wife. But Abraham is still acting as caretaker here. He's still in relationship with his son. And he sends his servant Eliezer to go find a wife for him. And he knows what kind of wife he needs to get him, right? Someone kind. And he makes sure that his servant knows to get him a kind wife. Listen, maybe he wants a kind wife because he knows he himself was not so kind at one point, right? Because he just had this awful experience. Maybe he just knows his son's temperament. I think it's clear that they are still in relationship. The wife comes, Rebecca. Of course, she's the most kind. She gave water to all the animals. So you know that she's going to take care of Isaac, which she does. And maybe this was Abraham's way of doing a little tshuva for that incident, of making sure that Isaac is well cared for.
There had to be a connection and a conversation. Isaac is the link.
Right?
If Isaac goes his own way, Judaism dies.
Right. Agreed. That's why I think we're misled by saying, oh, the text, they don't talk anymore. They don't have a relationship because this incident, this near sacrifice was the worst thing. Yeah, it's bad, but it didn't happen. Let's remember, it didn't happen. God did stop it. I think it's a really important lesson for us in looking at the whole big picture of a situation. If we just look at the near sacrifice, then we miss the whole relationship that develops perhaps after. What do we also know? What else happens after this incident in their family? Sarah dies. Now, the rabbis like to say she died because of this horrible thing that happened. Well, she was old. She was really old. She was 100 or something. Maybe it was just time. And I imagine Abraham and Isaac coming down the mountain. Maybe she's sick. They care for her. They bury her together, right? What further tells me that they have a relationship, in chapter 25, the text tells us that Abraham wills all that he has to Isaac. He takes care of him. He makes sure that Isaac is okay. He makes sure he has a wife. He makes sure he has material wealth. Okay, that may be. Guilt may be some motivator, but a motivator, but it still implies that they have relationship, right? The polemic I'm fighting against here is the idea that they never speak again, and I think that would not be true. Okay. All right, you can go that way. You can go that way, Aline. I think when I do text study, I tend to take after my dad. My dad still has rose-colored glasses and always likes to find the good, always likes to find the optimistic good outcome. I want to find the good relationship here between Abraham and Isaac. I do not want to think that the rabbis chose this story for us to read every year for not a good reason, for only the reason of understanding that we have faith in God. Because that lesson doesn't speak to us as much, right? I don't sit here wondering who has faith and who doesn't, right? I don't tell you how to believe, but I might talk to you about your relationships, right? Because the whole crux of the Torah is how people behave with one another, right? In fact, Rabbi spoke about that this morning, about how we're all B'Tselem Elohim and how every life matters, and the Torah is about people relating to one another. I want to know for myself that this family comes together in some way, that they grow from this experience, that Isaac learned about faith from his father, forgave him, learned how to forgive, learned how to reconcile and love each other and live together. Because don't families have trauma and then recover? Yes. Sometimes families have trauma and they can overcome it. And some of it's serious trauma and they can overcome it. Questions, comments? Thank you for the polemic. So it's also interesting to bring us back to the idea of siblings, because remember, Isaac had a sibling, Ishmael. Isaac and Ishmael. Right, sorry. Okay. Oh, no, okay. Just want to make sure I was on the right page. Okay. So remember that Isaac and Ishmael, they used to play when they were kids. Oh, did you have a question? Oh, okay. So it says, but of course, Sarah gets mad, and Hagar doesn't want Ishmael to inherit what she believes is Isaac's birthright. So Hagar has to leave, and we wonder about Isaac and Ishmael. Did they have a relationship? We don't really know. But the issue isn't really between the two of them, is it? right? That's really an issue between their mothers, which again just reminds us that parents, even in this kind of weird family situation, really can impact the children and how they relate to each other. And it's true, there are people who have step families and stepchildren, and can't those parents really influence how kids relate to their steps, right? And I, of course, always want families to find a way together. Now, it does say that, of course, that Isaac and Ishmael come together when they bury their father. So I like to think, in my rose-colored glasses way, that they do have a relationship, even if maybe they're distant or they don't live together, that they're okay. Let's look at Jacob and Esau. This is Genesis it's a long story, around 32, 33, it goes on and on. So what's interesting about the Jacob and Esau story, for me, is that it has a lot to do with Jacob and Jacob's growth, right? And why do I say that? Who knows what I'm getting towards? The birthright issue, right? Right? So let's talk about the birthright issue. So technically, Esau is the oldest, right? They're twins, but Esau comes out first. So technically, he should get the birthright. And there's a lot of machinations that happen with Rebekah, helping them so that Isaac gets tricked and the birthright goes to the younger, right, to Jacob. Right? So here again, we could talk about parenting styles, right, and favoritism, and this is definitely a case kind of like the Joseph story where one kid is favored over the other. But why does she do it? Why does she favor Yaakov? There's actually another reason. There's another bigger reason. The text tells us she has this dream, or it says God came and talked to her while the babies were still in her womb and told her that the younger was going to rule the older, right? So she had this premonition, she had this dream. Again, kind of like Abraham being told, go sacrifice your kid. She's being told, you need to make sure that the younger serves the older, right? So you got to be careful when you listen to God. You know, the advice could be kind of shaky. But maybe, perhaps, and we always say this too, God knew what the personalities of these two young boys were going to be. And Yaakov was definitely the one that was expected to be the leader of the Jewish people, more so than Esau. We can analyze that for a long time. But there's another layer to this story with Jacob that I find the most interesting, and which impacts the story about forgiveness and reconciliation. Who has the revelation as they get older? The boys eventually separate, right? Esau says, I'm going to kill you because you took my birthright, so Jacob has to leave. And Rebekah sends him off to Haran, and they're separated for a long time. And while they're separated, Jacob gets married a few times and has handmaidens and has kids. Esau's off at Edom doing his family thing. And then what? Right, so there's this moment where they're going to come back together. So what's going to happen? What could happen? What are the possibilities? Jacob hears that Esau's coming with an army. So what is Jacob thinking? He's coming to kill me. He told me he was going to do that. Right, like Cain and Abel, only with warning this time. Right? Jacob doesn't know what to think. He knows something about what happened, doesn't he? What is Jacob carrying with him? What is that burden that he has on his shoulders that he's carrying with him all these years about his brother? He knows what he did wrong. Whether Rebekah put him up to it or not, he knows. Jacob knows that he took the birthright from his brother. He knows he tricked his father. He knows he put on hair to make it look like he was Esau when he wasn't. He knows he acted deceitfully. And he's carrying this burden around like I talked about earlier, right? Like putting on the goat and carrying that around. You can't ever escape that. So what happens to him? He's about ready to go see his brother. He has no idea what to expect. I don't even think he knows what he wants or what he expects. And he separates himself the night before, and he lays his head down, and what happens? He has a dream, or maybe it's not a dream, we don't know. What happens? An ish, right? An ish in Hebrew is a man or a human, although, as you know, the rabbis, some of them say it was an angel. There's all kinds of different interpretations of this ish being. And what do? They wrestle. And here's a really interesting thing that I learned in researching this, and it comes from Rashi and Ramban. The term avika, which means to wrestle, is often used by the rabbis to mean chavika, or hug. And think about how that changes the whole scenario. The ish comes and hugs Jacob. And maybe it feels like a wrestle because maybe Jacob doesn't even know how to accept this hug. Like, what are you doing? Like, why are you hugging me? And what's going on? How does he come out of that experience differently than if they're actually wrestling? We're getting there. We're getting there. Right. In fact, okay. Helene said that sometimes people need a hug to help them calm down and relax. You hold them tight. In fact, it's funny that you say that, Helene, because recently in our religious school, we had a little boy who was having a rough time, and one of our teachers knew of this process, and she said to him, "Do we have a calm body? Do you have a calm body? Can I hold you and help you have a calm body?" And she took him, he was willing, and she held him, and it calmed him down. It was amazing. So it's really a real thing. It's a real technique when you're dealing with children with special needs. But maybe that's what it is. Maybe he was having trouble sleeping, and maybe this ish comes to hold him because he has all this angst about meeting his brother and says, "Hey, I'm going to come and hold you." But, maybe he's still fighting. One writer talked about, I have the book in my box, Joshua Cohen wrote this great book about families in the Torah, and he talks about this wrestling match being less of a wrestling match and more of a dance. That they're dancing together. And can you get hurt dancing? Yes, trust me, you can. And in that dance of understanding, in that dance of learning, because that dance is about Jacob coming to terms in his own mind of what this relationship with with Esau can be, right? He doesn't know where this is going, and he's struggling because he has all this guilt. How do you think he comes out of that? He does prevail. Exactly, that's what the text says. So what does that mean, he prevails? I'm not sure. I never thought of that myself, but that could be. Let's take the rose-colored glasses view. What else could it mean? Mm-hmm. Right? That sometimes we deal with the unknown. This Ish, this unknown being, could be another being, but it could also be his internal being, right? His internal self that he's dancing with, that he's struggling with, because he knows that he made a mistake. He knows that he's carrying this burden. And maybe what he's realizing is he doesn't want to carry it anymore. Maybe this is an act of forgiving oneself, right? So if you forgive yourself, does that make it easier to forgive another? It seems logical, right? But he goes to that meeting with the intent of forgiving, with the intent of maybe for sure, maybe he wants to ask for forgiveness, and his hopes that he's forgiven. Mm-hmm.
Could it be that by injuring himself, it's like, okay, I got all this wealth, let me buy my life back. I'm going to give you all these animals, and I'm hurt, take compassion on me.
That could be. That could be. I think that the dance and the injury is meant to say that, we all get scarred in these situations, right? If you have a falling out with someone, you're scarred for life. And I think that injury is a representation that for the rest of his life, even though they may come to some reconciliation, we'll get to the point whether we decide he's really truly reconciled, but if they are, he's going to carry it around with him because it says he limps, right? He's still going to carry that with him his whole life as a way of remembering that this incident happened, that this relationship is out there, that it required a teshuvah, and that's part of his teshuvah. So now let's check ourselves. Do they actually come together? Do they reconcile? Yeah? Tell me more. Okay, Jacob is prepared to give Esau all of these animals and everything, and when he comes to see him, he bows down to him as if to say, please forgive me, right? Or I forgive you. We can decide which one he's saying. And then what happens? Before that. They hug, right? They hug. It says that Jacob kisses him on the neck, and they have this embrace, right? Like the embracing with the ish, right? With that wrestling, that dancing with the ish. Now he's wrestling and dancing with his brother, right? Then what happens? Even more than that, and I want to find the text that says it. I don't know what the exact text is. They seem to reconcile in that moment, right? There seems to be forgiveness. And Esau says, come back with me to Edom, and we'll be together, and we'll raise our families. And Jacob says to him, yeah, that's a good idea. I'll be along soon. And never does go. So think about that for a second. Let's see if I can find that text. I'm sorry, page 205? Oh, thank you. So Esau says, let us start on our journey, and I will proceed at your pace. But he says to him, my Lord, and Jacob says, my Lord knows that the children are frail and that the flocks and herds which are nursing are a care to me. If they are driven hard on a single day, all the flocks will die. Let my Lord, you Esau, go ahead of me, right? While I travel slowly at the pace of the cattle before me and at the pace of the children until I come to my Lord in Seir. Then Esau said, let me assign to you some of the men who are with me. But Jacob says, oh no, Lord, you're too kind. I don't need any of your helpers, right? And so Esau started back on that day, back to Seir. But Jacob journeyed on to Sukkot and built a house for himself and made stalls for his cattle. And they never do meet. So we just had that little dance, that little I forgive you dance. And then Jacob deliberately doesn't go. Yeah.
Does the text mention that Esau forgave Jacob?
It doesn't technically. It just, okay, here, let's look at that. Chapter 33, page 203. Okay, I'll read it. Looking up, Jacob saw Esau coming, accompanied by 400 men. He divided the children among Leah, Rachel, and the two maids. Esau, and he himself went on ahead, and he bowed low to the ground 7 times until he was near his brother. Esau ran to greet him. He embraced him, and falling on his neck, he kissed him, and they wept. Looking about, he saw the women and the children, and he asked, "Who are these?" He says, "The children with whom God has favored your servant." And then the maids with their children come forward, and they bow low. Next, Leah with her children come forward and bow low. And last, Joseph and Rachel come forward and bow low. And he asked, "What do you mean by all this company which I have met?" And he answered, "To gain my Lord's favor." And Esau says, "I have enough, my brother. Let what you have remain yours." So here Jacob was offering, and even Esau says, "I'm doing okay. Thanks, but I don't need your stuff." But Jacob says, "No, I pray you, if you would do me this one favor, accept from me this gift, for to see your face is like seeing the face of God, and you have received me favorably. Please accept my present which has been brought to you, for God has favored me, and I have plenty." And then he urged him, and then he accepted. So it took some encouraging. And then Esau says, "Let us start on our journey." So why does Esau finally accept the gift? At first he declines it, though. Why does he change his mind? Okay, so we teach people that if you are doing teshuvah and you go and you ask for forgiveness, you're supposed to go and ask 3 times. Because if the person says, "No, I'm not going to forgive you," then you need to go again. And the person says, "No, I still don't forgive you." And then if you go a 3rd time and they still don't forgive you, it's as if you're forgiven, right? The 3 "I'm sorry" rule. If you try truly to repent 3 times and the other person is failing to really forgive you, there's not much more we can always do, right? So here, Jacob is saying, forgive me, here's all this stuff. And Esau says, "No, I don't need it." But finally he says, "All right, I'll forgive you." Yeah. Excellent. So, yeah, at first Esau's like, "Look, buddy, I did fine without you." Right? I have just as much wealth as you have. I am not in need of your pity or your charity, right? So then, therefore, if your teshuvah is real, then I'll take your stuff, right? So now what do we think? What do we think? Why does Jacob then deliberately turn away from him? There's no real clear answer. Maybe. Yeah, imagine how Esau feels when he gets back to Seir and Jacob never, she's saying, I'm really bad at paraphrasing. She's saying that he doesn't need, can you say it again? Here, I'm going to give you the microphone. That's better.
Now I have to remember what I said. I said that maybe Jacob got his forgiveness, and so then he didn't feel like he needed to go and be with his brother anymore. But then how does Esau feel now that, he forgave his brother and Jacob's like shunning him now or gone?
Right. So that's a question. Imagine you're Esau, you're back in your town and you're waiting for him to show up. How do you think he feels now?
Especially probably he may have had, "Hey, my brother's coming, great thing, he's this great guy, and now he doesn't come, so now I look even more foolish."
Yeah, it doesn't make him look very good, does it? Sad. So for me, this is a story of non-reconciliation. This is a story of 2 brothers who they have this moment together where it feels like everything is going to be okay, but Jacob then decides that he doesn't need this relationship. I'm sorry, what?
Maybe Esau feels a little bit of relief, though. Maybe because of, he forgave his brother, so he feels good about it. But then if his brother comes to come live with him, then maybe there's going to be tension in the relationship. So maybe he feels a little relief that I've made my peace, he's made his peace, and now I can go on and live my life. So maybe he does in your little rose-colored glasses.
Right. And we could even say that maybe Jacob feels relieved. Now he knows that his brother's not going to come after him and kill him. At least he knows that, right? Because they just shared this moment, and all his life he'd been carrying this burden around that his brother was going to come kill him, and now he doesn't have that burden anymore.
But he still has that feeling. Jacob goes, I go to his home, that's the end of it.
Oh, that's interesting. I hadn't thought of that. That's a really interesting idea. If I go, despite this little dance we just did, if I go to your home, maybe that's not safe for me. Maybe that's a really interesting point. And that could be, when you put it in modern terms, some people just aren't meant to live together, right? Some siblings are better friends when they don't live together. My brother lives in Illinois. A little bit of a Cold War.
It feels like maybe a Cold War between them. Like they went through the motions and they did a political reconciliation. Like, yeah, we're all good. But are they?
Yeah. Excellent. Yeah.
I was looking for it, can't find it, but they did come together when Isaac died, though.
They do.
Yes, they did.
Right? Just like Isaac and Jacob came together for their father's death. So it's a Cold War, but they still feel some allegiance to their father, and they come together, but they certainly don't. That encounter, they don't tell us much, right? They come, they sit Shiva, and they go. And isn't that true in families too, right? Sometimes, and I know this is true from my experience with families, when someone dies, it's either a real big catalyst for further reconciliation, or it's the end for sure, or it just stays neutral, right? All three of those things can happen. Clearly, in this case, the two brothers never do come back together, really. They're in this perpetual neutrality. And is that okay?
Maybe it needed to be that way because we know what the future is bringing, and it's got to be Jacob and his progeny to bring us here.
Right. And that's a really good point, because ultimately we take this book in its entirety, and we know how it ends, right? We've read the end before we read the beginning, and we know that Jacob's the one who's going to carry on the name and be our family, our legacy. But what kind of father does he become? A terrible one, right? So these stories are connected generation to generation. He plays all kinds of favorites with Joseph. He makes his 11 other sons really mad and set Joseph up for failure, right? Because what do the brothers do? They throw him in a pit and they sell him away. What?
He didn't learn from his mistakes.
Jacob doesn't learn from his mistakes, right? He still has trouble relating as a brother, as a family man, as a parent.
Well, he deceived his father, and his sons deceived him. When they come back saying that, his favorite son was killed.
Well, yeah, after that, right? Because he paid favorites, right? So yeah, so he set his whole family up. What could have happened instead? Here Jacob had this amazing encounter with an angel himself. He had this night of revelation. What should have come out of that? Growth should have come out of that, right? When you have a life-altering experience, there should be growth, there should be learning, there should be improvement, there should be a greater understanding of how we're meant to be and love, right? There should be love between brothers and love between parents and their children. And he fails to learn that. Maybe that's why he has to walk around with a limp for the rest of his life, because he didn't take the lesson. It didn't stick. Because as a parent, he could have said to his sons, and he had so many of them, I love all of you, right? Yeah, Rachel was his favorite wife. Again, let's not even talk about favorites between wives. Can't relate. But so therefore, he chooses Joseph as his favorite because of Rachel. And what he should have done is just treated all his kids like they're the same. Like, we all know this, right? We all know this. We're all parents. And he makes the biggest mistake. Imagine how the story would have been different. The brothers get along. They thrive. Right? I'm waiting for someone to say that. But we know that God needs us to somehow get down into Egypt so that we can be enslaved, so that we can then be made free, right?
It's so easy to say what could have been different, but maybe there would have never been Joseph if Jacob had done something different. So you never know what.
Right. We can't always live in a world
Yeah.
of what ifs.
Yeah.
Right? So what is the lesson for us today when we read these stories? What is we can take them apart, we can pretend we're the rabbis, we can fill in the blank space and create our own midrashim about these characters and these stories. And it is important to learn their flaws, to learn about the mistakes that we make. We do talk a lot when we study these stories about favoritism, right? We as parents know that we're not supposed to do that. And I don't know of anybody who does, who's ever copped to that. But I do work with families and I do work with children. And I think that parents fully intend to treat all their children fairly and equally. We raise our children to be good people. And in order for that to happen, we have to be good people, right? And I think that there's a parenting lesson here. Again, we talked about that with Cain and Abel. And now we have Jacob being a not-so-great parent. And then there's the whole issue of siblings. And siblings will always be a challenge. I love teaching about siblings to kids because they will always go at it. Oh, I hate my brother. My brother, he comes into my room and he takes my stuff, right? You never did that to Erica ever, I'm sure. Never, right? And then I challenge them to go home and hug their brother. Like, just try it, just see what happens. And they giggle, right? Because it sounds so silly. But then I bet you every once in a while someone does go home and do it because they actually love their siblings. And I see so many sibling sets in our schools, tons of them. They're so close. They're such good friends, right? So I know we're doing much better than Jacob did as a parent. So the lesson is to keep turning and turning and turning these stories. Keep challenging them. Keep challenging ourselves because ultimately we want to be better people. And when it comes to forgiveness and reconciliation, it is always possible. If I can reconcile with my brother, anything's possible. And we are friends now, I should say. We are friends. It's hard, and you have to be the one sometimes to bow 7 times, or to offer forgiveness, or say I'm sorry 3 times, and take the risk that they're going to say no. But it's worth the risk to have reconciliation and to stop carrying the burden and to free our hearts from that stress. Questions, thoughts? Thank you for joining me today. Awesome. Thank you. Thanks at home for watching. For those of you who are interested in yoga, it's across the way in the Family Life Center. Thank you. Thank you. That's fun. Studying Torah is fun. Next time I'll have to do the whole Joseph thing. It's a whole...